The lights on my solar panel system flickered like a dying heartbeat the moment my neighbor Karen plugged her Tesla into my outdoor outlet. The power surge crawled through my property like a living thing, silent, greedy, unstoppable. For weeks, I couldn't figure out why my solar batteries drained every night. But when I finally checked the footage, what I saw changed everything. A theft, a betrayal, and a dangerous truth hiding right behind her perfect HOA smile. If you believe homeowners deserve justice when HOAs or entitled neighbors cross the line, subscribe. This story proves how truth, power, and karma always find their way back. The first sign was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. This was the hollow quiet of something being taken from you without your permission. My solar generator, usually humming softly through the night, had begun to whine like a tired machine pushing far beyond what it was designed for. At first, I blamed the system itself. Maybe a loose connection. Maybe a faulty battery. But every inspection ended the same way. Everything looked perfect, at least on the surface. The real issue crept in slowly, like a shadow stretching across my yard. My power reserves, built from a full day of sun, should have carried me through the night without strain. Yet each morning, the battery meter blinked dangerously low, as if someone had drained every drop. My home office flickered awake like a sick patient. The outdoor cameras stuttered. The porch lights dimmed. It wasn't just a malfunction anymore. It felt intentional. The HOA pretended to care when I mentioned the issue in passing, but their eyes always drifted toward the paperwork on their desk or the clock on the wall. They never listened unless it benefited them. And standing at the center of every meeting was Karen, sharp smile, crossed arms, and a voice that always carried more accusation than concern. She had a Tesla, a spotless driveway, and an opinion on everything I did. According to her, my solar panels were too reflective, my plants too wild, and my shed too industrial. She lived for control, rules, and the illusion of perfection. But she didn't know I'd been noticing the footprint. Every morning, subtle smudges appeared near the side of my house, shoe prints where no one had any reason to walk. The grass curved in an unnatural pattern, pressed down overnight. I brushed it off as kids or roaming pets until I saw the scratches on my outdoor outlet. Deep, fresh gouges on the plastic, like someone had plugged and unplugged something repeatedly in the dark. That was the moment the suspicion solidified. Someone was stealing power. And in this neighborhood, someone usually meant one person. Still, guesses weren't enough. Evidence was what counted. I upgraded my cameras, adjusting the angles to cover every blind spot. The HOA had once complained about visible security systems, but I'd long stopped letting their petty rules dictate my safety. I installed a quiet system, infrared, high resolution, nearly invisible from the outside. If someone was creeping around my property at night, I'd see them. The next morning, the battery was lower than ever. My system groaned like it had been drained down to the core. The problem was accelerating, not improving. So that night, I stepped outside and stood quietly near the back of the yard, letting the cool air settle over me. I wasn't waiting to confront anyone directly. I simply needed to feel the atmosphere, to sense the intrusion. And as the hours passed, the neighborhood changed from warm porch lights to cold, hollow windows. Everything settled into darkness, except for the faint glow from Karen's garage. Her Tesla always sat there like a trophy, gleaming even in low light. Midnight passed. Then 1. Then 2. Nothing. But the battery drained again overnight. Something wasn't adding up. When morning came, I finally unlocked the security app. The new cameras had captured every angle. I scrolled through the footage until my heart froze in my chest. The grainy outline sharpened, the angles shifted, and then it became crystal clear. A figure approached my property around 2:17 a.m. They moved quickly, confidently, as though they had done this before, because they had. The person crouched near the outlet, lifted a heavy charging cable, and plugged it straight into the socket. The cable snaked across the yard, vanishing into the shadows leading toward Karen's garage. That was when I finally saw her face. Karen's expression was smug, almost casual. She plugged in the charging cable like she owned the outlet, like my solar power was her personal assistant keeping her Tesla alive through the night. And the way she looked around afterward, barely checking, showed she had no fear of consequences. She was stealing electricity, draining my power system, and doing it all with the confidence of someone who believed the HOA would protect her. I replayed the footage again and again, not because I doubted it but because the audacity needed time to settle. She wasn't just a thief, she was bold enough to keep stealing after I had repeatedly mentioned power issues in past meetings. She had stood across from me, nodding like she cared, all while secretly draining my energy every night. But something else stood out in the footage. When she plugged in the charger, a faint spark snapped from the outlet. It wasn't normal. She had overloaded the system, badly. The connection glowed faintly, pulsing with each surge. She didn't just steal power. She was risking a short circuit. A fire hazard. A total system collapse. That was when the fear sharpened into something else. Resolve. I decided not to confront her immediately. Not to call the HOA. Not to shout or argue. Instead, I spent the day strengthening my system, adjusting the voltage, and preparing for a moment she would never forget. If she wanted to steal from me, she was about to discover what a fully fortified solar grid at peak output felt like. And this time, I would catch everything on crystal clear video. The night arrived, and so did she. She didn't know what was waiting. Cliffhanger: the moment her Tesla charger clicked into my outlet again, the voltage meter spiked into the red, and the cameras locked onto her with perfect clarity, just as something sparked violently behind her. The spike in voltage wasn't subtle. It surged through my system like a fast-moving storm, illuminating every sensor and alert panel I had installed. The cameras switched from standard night mode to high-definition infrared, capturing every detail in a crisp, cinematic glow. Karen didn't notice. She plugged in her charger with the same routine confidence she had shown for weeks, the cable snapping into place as though she had practiced it 100 times. Her Tesla sat across the property line, hungry for the energy she believed she could quietly siphon without consequence. The faint hum of the vehicle's internal systems vibrated through the still night as it began feeding from the outlet she thought was unprotected. But this time, the grid behaved differently. My solar batteries, fully charged from a day of deliberate conservation, reacted instantly to the unusual pull. The voltage reading climbed, then steadied, then climbed again. I watched from my office window, the glow of the monitor painting my walls in shifting patterns. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing everything come together, the strengthened circuits, the reinforced breakers, the new monitoring system. Each upgrade had been installed not out of spite, but out of necessity. Karen had pushed the boundaries, and now she was meeting a boundary she couldn't control. The footage zoomed in on her face automatically. A single spark jumped from the outlet to her hand, making her jerk back slightly. She stared at the outlet, confusion spreading across her features. It was the first crack in her perfect, self-assured mask. She hesitated, checking the cable, checking the connection, trying to understand why the system didn't behave like it usually did. The spark hadn't hurt her, but it startled her enough to make the moment feel heavier than usual. She glanced toward her house, then toward mine, her eyes narrow and suspicious. But she didn't unplug. She pushed the cable deeper into the outlet, forcing a firmer connection. That's when the overdraw began. The charger demanded more power than before, pulling at the system in sharp, greedy gulps. The batteries responded, pushing back with the full stored force of a sun-soaked day. The charger flickered. The Tesla's running lights pulsed. The sound of the current thickened, a low-frequency vibration rolling across the yard like distant thunder. Then came the flash. A bright burst exploded from the outlet for a split second, white, hot, almost silent. Karen stumbled back, throwing her hand up to shield her face. The flash faded quickly, leaving a thin trail of smoke curling upward from the plug. She stared at it in disbelief, frozen in shock and fear. It was the first time she had seen visible evidence of the danger she had created. Her confidence evaporated instantly. Still, she didn't disconnect. She stepped forward again, slowly, cautiously, as if the machine she worshipped, the Tesla she polished daily, bragged about constantly, and charged secretly at my expense, needed her protection. She reached for the charger, but before she could touch it, the outdoor floodlights snapped on with a cold, harsh brightness. Motion detection. Every one of them activated simultaneously, illuminating her and the cable like a stage performance she never intended to star in. Her expression twisted. She looked like a trapped animal, caught between fear and fury. She wasn't alone in the spotlight. My cameras captured everything from multiple angles, the footage stored securely in the cloud in case she tried anything later. For a moment, she simply stood still, stunned by the flood of light. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward my house. The shadows around her retreated under the brightness, revealing every detail. Her clenched jaw, her trembling fingers, the charging cable lying taut between the Tesla and my outlet, and the faint scorch mark forming on the plastic. She knew she had been caught. But instead of retreating, she did something worse. She marched over to the outlet and yanked the charging cable free, holding it like a piece of evidence she intended to use against me. Her face burned with the kind of anger that came only from entitlement. People like her never believed they were wrong, even when confronted with proof. She waved the cable at the camera, shouting something the microphones couldn't pick up, likely blaming me for the spark, the flash, the danger she had caused with her own theft. She stepped closer to my property line, still clutching the charger. The tension in her posture shifted. Every part of her body radiated accusation. She pointed at the outlet, then at my window, as if she expected me to come out and answer for what had happened. She wanted confrontation. She wanted control. She wanted to twist the narrative before it had even begun. But I stayed inside. Instead, I let the system continue recording. Her frustration built. She paced back and forth, examining the outlet, the yard, the charger, the house, anything she could use against me. Her Tesla's onboard system beeped in the background, alerting her to an incomplete or unsafe charging connection. She ignored it. Her ego had taken the wheel. Then she made a mistake that sealed everything. She plugged the cable back in. The outlet hissed. Another small spark flared at the contact point. The Tesla's charging port flickered red, warning her of unstable power. But she didn't stop. She pushed harder, forcing the connection into place even as the charger protested. This was no longer about stealing power. It was about proving she couldn't be stopped. The system reacted again. The voltage climbed sharply, the internal protection mechanisms triggering in rapid succession. The Tesla's lights dimmed, then pulsed, then dimmed again. The charger crackled like a live wire trapped between two competing currents. The air around the outlet shimmered faintly, the heat rising as though the metal itself was struggling to contain the force being poured into it. Karen finally stepped back. Fear replaced arrogance. She didn't know what to do. And that's when she noticed the small blinking red light on the camera, something I had added specifically for footage confirmation. It blinked steadily, calmly, reminding her she wasn't just caught, she was being recorded in perfect, undeniable detail. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. She unplugged the charger fully, stepped back from the outlet, and hurried toward her Tesla with a nervous energy. The car's alarm beeped twice as she opened the door, climbed in, and shut it behind her. The headlights cut through the night, and she backed away from my property like someone fleeing a crime scene. But the story wasn't over. As she pulled out of her driveway, something else flickered in the darkness. A movement near the edge of her garage. A shadow that didn't belong to Karen. Someone had been watching her the entire time. And they weren't from the HOA. Cliffhanger, the unknown figure stepped fully into view, staring directly at my camera, before turning and walking straight toward Karen's house. The figure emerged from the shadows with a deliberate slowness that suggested familiarity with the darkness, not fear of it. The camera's infrared mode sharpened the silhouette into a recognizable human shape: broad shoulders, steady posture, slow, calculated movements. This wasn't a neighbor out for a late walk. This wasn't someone stumbling in confusion. Whoever this person was, they had been watching long before Karen began her frantic retreat. Their steps carried an unsettling purpose, hinting at involvement far deeper than a simple witness. I leaned closer to the monitor, trying to make sense of the presence. The cameras tracked the figure automatically, focusing in on the face, adjusting exposure, stabilizing the zoom. Bit by bit, the blur resolved into something clearer. It was a man, maybe mid-40s, hair cut short, expression blank but observant. He didn't look surprised by the sparks, the voltage spikes, or Karen's panicked reaction. Instead, he observed everything like a silent inspector evaluating a problem that wasn't his, but affected him nonetheless. He stopped near the edge of the property line, staring directly into the lens. The camera recognized the movement and focused harder, sharpening every detail of his expression. His eyes were dark, steady, unwavering. Not aggressive, not friendly, just watching. I felt a slow chill crawl through my chest. People didn't usually stare directly into security cameras unless they wanted to send a message. He held the stare for several seconds before turning abruptly toward Karen's house. The motion was smooth and unwavering, as though he knew exactly where he needed to go. He walked up her driveway with a precision that felt practiced. Every part of his body language radiated intent. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no concern for whether she was home or in her car leaving the neighborhood. The man simply entered her property, walking beneath the soft glow of her porch light without even glancing at the cameras. For a moment I considered calling the police. But something held me back. This neighborhood was under an HOA that never responded unless the situation inconvenienced them. And the man didn't look like someone breaking in. He looked like someone who already belonged there, someone Karen knew, or someone she didn't want anyone to know about. I watched as he approached her side door, pausing only once to adjust his jacket. The door opened before he touched it, as if someone inside had been expecting him. Then the video flickered. Not the camera malfunctioning. Something had disrupted the signal briefly, a single static ripple across the screen. When the image clarified, the man was gone and the door was shut. The entire sequence lasted less than a minute, but it unsettled me more than the footage of Karen stealing power. There was more happening in this neighborhood than stolen electricity. Something beneath the ordinary complaints and HOA meetings. Something neither visible nor spoken about. Morning arrived with a heavy atmosphere, as though the events of the night had left an imprint on the air itself. My solar system held strong after the surge, though the outlet bore the faint scorch marks of Karen's stubbornness. The footage had captured everything, from the spark to her frantic retreat to the mysterious man entering her home. I saved the files in multiple backups, not trusting a single cloud archive to keep them safe. Experience taught me that HOA disputes had a habit of erasing evidence when it benefited the wrong people. By mid-morning, the familiar sound of leaf blowers and sprinklers filled the street, giving the illusion of normalcy. Neighbors carried on as though nothing unusual had happened. But Karen's driveway was empty. Her Tesla was gone, and the man from the footage was nowhere in sight. I walked outside, inspecting the outlet more closely. The plastic was warm to the touch, even after hours of rest. The scorch marks, faint but undeniable, curled around the edges like blackened veins. The metal prongs inside had warped slightly from the surge. Her persistence could have caused real damage, not just to my system, but to the entire circuit. That's when I noticed it. A footprint, larger than Karen's, pressed into the soil beside the outlet. The same size and shape as the shoe of the man from the footage. He had walked right up to my property after she fled, stepping close enough to inspect the damage himself. Only after evaluating it had he returned to her house. The realization settled like dust on old furniture. Karen wasn't working alone. As the hours passed, my concern slowly shifted into investigation. I downloaded the footage again, slowing it frame by frame, analyzing every detail of the man's clothing and posture. His jacket was clean, well-fitted, and free of any HOA logos. His shoes bore no mud, no signs of outdoor work. His movements were precise, deliberate. He wasn't a handyman. He wasn't a neighbor. He moved like someone accustomed to authority, or accustomed to hiding it. Afternoon sunlight poured across the neighborhood, casting long shadows across driveways and lawns. But those shadows felt heavier now. The peaceful facade of the HOA community was thinning, revealing cracks beneath the surface. And Karen's house remained still, the blinds drawn tight, the porch empty, no footsteps, no movement behind the windows. It was as if she had vanished entirely after the incident. Late in the day, as I stepped out to check my mailbox, a quiet hum approached from the far end of the road. A familiar electric whir. The Tesla returned. It glided into the driveway with none of the panic from the night before. Karen stepped out first, her expression unreadable. She didn't look angry. She didn't look shaken. She looked composed, controlled, like someone who had been told exactly what to do next. Then the passenger door opened. The man from the footage stepped out. He scanned the neighborhood quickly, eyes absorbing every detail in a sweep that felt far too thorough to be casual. His gaze didn't linger on me, but he saw me. The brief acknowledgement in his posture told me he knew I was watching. He walked toward Karen's door, speaking quietly, confidently. She nodded as if receiving instructions, and then she turned toward my house. Not angry, not embarrassed, just determined. She began walking down the driveway toward me, each step steady, intentional. The man remained by her door, watching with the same blank patience he had displayed in the footage. Karen stopped at the edge of my property. Her eyes were different now, calculating, cold, unwavering. And then she smiled. Cliffhanger, she calmly announced that the HOA would be inspecting my solar system immediately. By order of someone I had never heard of before, someone she claimed had authority over both of us. Karen's smile didn't carry its usual sharp edges or smug confidence. This time, it felt rehearsed, polished, even practiced, like she was delivering a script prepared by someone else. The sun reflected off her neatly pressed blouse as she stood at the edge of my yard, hands clasped in front of her, posture unnaturally straight. Behind her, the mysterious man leaned against her garage door with quiet authority, watching every movement like an observer taking mental notes for a report he'd later submit. "The HOA will be inspecting your solar system," she announced with a calmness that felt unnatural. "By order of Mr. Dalton." A name I had never heard, a name none of us had heard at any HOA meeting. Yet she spoke it as though it were law. I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't, but because I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing confusion or concern. She wasn't leading this charge. The man behind her was. His presence shaped her tone, her posture, even the steady rhythm of her breathing. She was performing under supervision. Karen glanced briefly toward him before continuing, "We've had reports of electrical hazards coming from your property. The inspection is mandatory." The irony nearly forced a laugh from me. Her illegal charging, her dangerous overload, her relentless theft had created those hazards, yet now she was attempting to weaponize the results against me. It was a tactic I'd seen before in HOA communities. Create a problem, then blame the victim to avoid accountability. Usually, Karen led such maneuvers. But now, someone else was pulling the strings. "Mr. Dalton." Karen stepped back after delivering her message, clearly instructed not to linger or provoke. She returned to the man's side, speaking softly. He didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't show reaction. He simply absorbed the information. Then the two disappeared into her house without another word. The street went quiet. The air thickened. Something had shifted, something bigger than Karen's typical theatric. An unknown authority had entered the equation, and the balance of power in the neighborhood was no longer familiar. I returned to my house, reviewing every piece of footage again. The sparks, the power surges, Karen's theft, the man's calculated inspection, every detail mattered now. If they planned to twist the narrative, I needed to stay several steps ahead. So I organized everything meticulously, labeling files, arranging timestamps, backing up audio logs. Evidence was protection. Evidence was power. As evening approached, I noticed movement outside. Not Karen. Not the man. HOA board members, 3 of them, standing near my driveway as though waiting for permission to step closer. They whispered among themselves, glancing nervously toward Karen's house. They didn't knock. They didn't call out. Their presence felt hesitant, like they were following orders they didn't fully understand. Finally, I stepped outside and the trio straightened reflexively. "We were told," one began, "that your solar system may be violating HOA safety guidelines." The words sounded heavy in his mouth, as if he didn't truly believe them. The other 2 shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact. I could see it now. This wasn't their plan. They had been pushed into this role by someone more forceful. "Who instructed you?" I asked. They exchanged glances. Finally, the oldest whispered, "Karen. And the consultant she brought in." Consultant. That explained the man's posture, his quiet authority. He wasn't a relative, a friend, or a neighbor. He was hired. But for what purpose? To intimidate? To investigate? To enforce something beyond the HOA's standard rules? The board members apologized quickly, then left as quietly as they came. They didn't inspect anything. They didn't push. Their fear was palpable. Whatever Karen had told them, or whatever the consultant had implied, they wanted no part of escalating the situation. The night settled in deeper than usual, shadows stretching across the lawns like ink. My yard felt unnaturally still. The wind barely moved. For the first time since I moved here, I felt watched in my own neighborhood. Then I heard it. A faint tapping, a polite, calculated knock on my front door. I approached slowly, checking the camera feed before opening. The view confirmed what I already suspected. The consultant. He stood alone on my porch, posture straight, hands behind his back, not shifting weight or fidgeting. His expression was controlled, neutral, but the intensity in his eyes cut through the lens like a blade. I opened the door just enough to hear him. "Your solar system," he said calmly, "is drawing attention." He paused, studying me with unsettling patience, as though evaluating my reaction was part of his job. "You've created an imbalance. Your setup is unusually powerful for a residential property." The phrasing struck me. Not suspicious. Not dangerous. Unusually powerful. He wasn't here about rules. He was here about capacity. Before I could respond, he continued, "Karen is concerned about safety. And frankly, so am I." Concern. That word meant nothing coming from him. He shifted slightly, leaning in, not threateningly, but with deliberate intent. "I need to inspect your grid. Tonight." The absolute arrogance of the request settled like frost in my chest. Inspect my grid? After Karen had been secretly draining power from it? After her theft nearly set fire to the outlet? No. He wasn't looking for faults. He was assessing capability. "I decline," I said simply. The man didn't react. No frustration. No surprise. His expression remained empty, but something changed in his posture. A subtle tightening in his shoulders, as if a calculation had ended and a new one had begun. "You should reconsider," he said. "Because if you don't allow me access, the HOA will escalate the situation. And I'm certain that's something neither of us wants." With that, he stepped back, descending my porch like someone concluding a scheduled appointment. He didn't look around. Didn't check for witnesses. He walked directly toward Karen's house, disappearing into the side door again, as though the two shared more than just proximity. The moment he entered, the power in my house flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. But the surge reading on my monitoring panel spiked briefly, far too briefly for it to have come from within my own system. Someone had tapped into something. Someone had accessed power that wasn't theirs. My cameras switched to alert mode, sensing a new fluctuation. And then I saw it. A small device, barely visible, had been attached near my solar inverter. A device I hadn't installed. A device connected while I slept. Cliffhanger, it was transmitting data directly to Karen's house, and every second it stayed attached. It was siphoning more than just power. The small device clinging to the side of my solar inverter was no bigger than a matchbox, yet its presence radiated the cold weight of intrusion. It blinked softly, a faint rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. Not mine. Not my system's. A foreign pulse, steady, intentional, transmitting silently in the dark. The camera zoomed in automatically, its high-definition lenses catching the metallic sheen around the device's seams. Its design was clean, compact, and unmistakably professional. This was not something purchased casually online or cobbled together from spare parts. It was engineered, strategic, and placed by someone with access, knowledge, and motive. The realization spread through me slowly, the truth forming piece by piece like a picture sharpening into focus. They weren't just stealing power anymore. Karen and her hired consultant weren't reacting to danger. They were probing, testing, and measuring my system. They were assessing its capability, its strength, its potential. And now, with this device hidden in plain sight, they were siphoning more than energy. They were siphoning information. My system detected a microdrain, almost invisible, masked under normal fluctuations. Most people would never notice. But I had spent months optimizing every part of my setup. I recognized the faintest irregularity. The device wasn't drawing enough electricity to power anything. It was pulling data, voltage patterns, current flow, battery capacity, storage output. It wasn't here to damage my system. It was here to learn it, to map it, to replicate it, to exploit it. A sense of violation tightened across my chest. They had entered my property at night, an invasion without permission, without warning. They had crossed the line from petty HOA harassment into something coordinated, something planned, something that reached beyond neighborhood dispute. I pulled up the nighttime footage. The cameras caught the moment the device was attached. 2:41 a.m. A shadow moved into frame, crouched near the inverter, and worked with precise, clinical movement. Not Karen. She wasn't that quiet or skilled. It was the man, the consultant. He had moved like someone accustomed to bypassing alarms and minimizing noise. His posture gave away no hesitation, no uncertainty. He knew exactly where to place the device, how to conceal it, and how to avoid detection by standard systems. But he hadn't anticipated the depth of mine. Carefully, I isolated that segment of footage, enhancing shadows and sharpening contrast. His face turned slightly toward the camera at one point, illuminated just enough by the soft glow of the inverter's display panel. Calm, focused, not rushing, not looking over his shoulder. A man who felt secure in his secrecy. But now he was exposed. Morning arrived with a sky washed in pale blue, indifferent to the tension simmering across the neighborhood. Birds chirped, sprinklers ticked, lawns glistened. Yet beneath the surface, the air crackled with something tightly coiled. Karen's blinds were drawn again. Her Tesla sat in the driveway, unmoving, plugged into her own outlet this time, but the cable drooped lifelessly, detached from my system now that her theft was discovered. The man's car was nowhere in sight, suggesting he wasn't sleeping in her home, only occupying it as a temporary control center. I approached my inverter cautiously. Removing the device immediately wasn't an option. If it transmitted alerts when tampered with, I'd warn them too soon. I needed to understand it fully first. The blinking pulse continued, steady, never quickening, never faltering. I placed a small infrared thermometer near it. The temperature was neutral, no excessive heat. It was designed for stealth. Back inside, I set up an isolated analysis module, a tool I had used in the past to test solar optimizations without interfering with the main system. I mimicked a section of the circuit and replicated the device's power signature based on how my inverter responded. Slowly, the pattern emerged. It was a monitoring tool, a data siphon, a silent scout gathering intelligence. Why? Why would Karen, desperate to protect her image and her HOA authority, bring in someone with this level of expertise? What did they think my system contained? It was powerful, yes, stronger than the average residential build, but nothing justified this level of invasive analysis, unless they were planning something larger. The question sat with me all morning like a weight I couldn't shift. At noon, a black SUV rolled into the neighborhood, dark-tinted windows, unmarked plates, moving with the slow certainty of a vehicle that knew it didn't belong but also didn't fear being questioned. It stopped in front of Karen's house. The man stepped out. 2 others joined him. Their posture was nearly identical, controlled, steady, practiced. They weren't HOA members. They weren't neighbors. They were something else entirely. The SUV doors shut with dull, heavy thuds. Karen rushed outside, her face tense, her voice hushed. She gestured toward my house, then toward her garage, then toward something unseen behind her door. The man spoke quietly, and whatever he said made Karen stiffen with visible discomfort. She nodded repeatedly, almost eager to agree, eager to please. The 3 men entered her house, leaving Karen alone on the porch. She crossed her arms tightly, staring at the ground as though wrestling with guilt and fear. Her posture, for once, wasn't arrogant. It was unsettled, uncertain. She wasn't in control anymore. She was a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. The device on my inverter blinked again, faster for a moment, then stabilized. Data was being transmitted. Real time. The men inside Karen's home were receiving it. I watched from my living room as one of the SUV men stepped out of her house and walked straight toward my yard. He moved with the quiet authority of someone sent to confirm what they already suspected. He didn't cross onto my property. Instead, he stood near the curb, eyes scanning my system, my panels, the wiring, the layout. Not with curiosity, with evaluation. He returned to Karen's house without a word. Minutes later, the power in the neighborhood flickered again, not just my house but every house on the block. A synchronized dip, subtle but unmistakable. The grid had been accessed from somewhere nearby. My monitoring panel blinked in warning as the device's transmission spiked. Then, for the first time, the device emitted a sound, a quiet, electronic click. The camera captured it. The blinking light shifted from blue to red. Something had changed. They weren't just collecting data anymore. They were activating something. Cliffhanger. A moment later, my entire solar grid surged. Not from overload, but from an external signal forcing my system to maximum output, aimed directly toward Karen's house. The surge that rippled through my system was unlike anything I had experienced before. It wasn't chaotic or random. It was controlled, deliberate, an external command forcing my solar grid into maximum output, bypassing my manual settings. The meters spiked, their readings climbing sharply as though an invisible hand had seized the controls. My lights flared with sudden brilliance, shadows retreating into corners, and the hum of the inverter deepened into a low, steady roar that vibrated through the walls. The device attached to my inverter pulsed red now, no longer hiding its purpose. Red meant activation, transmission, and execution. Something had triggered it from Karen's house, and the surge that followed wasn't just a test. It was a signal. My system was being pushed, prodded, and forced into a state of output it wasn't designed to maintain without supervision. And the direction of that output, its target, its focus, was unmistakably oriented toward one place: Karen's home. The larger grid responded instantly. The artificial demand created a chain reaction across the neighborhood's electrical network. Streets' lights flickered. 2 houses dimmed. Another brightened unnaturally. It was as though someone had rerouted the flow of energy to create a concentrated stream of power, using my system as the engine. My heart pounded as I monitored the surge in real time, watching the numbers accelerate past safe threshold. And then the first light in Karen's house exploded. A bright flash erupted behind her living room curtains. The power overload tore through her circuits, ripping past her outdated fuses. Sparks flickered against the blinds like small, frantic stars. The street fell into stunned silence as the hum from my system intensified, the forced output pushing harder, faster, hotter. My panels absorbed sunlight efficiently, too efficiently, feeding energy into an artificial demand that grew like a living creature. I rushed outside just as Karen burst onto her porch, panic widening her eyes. She looked nothing like the smug, composed figure from the previous days. She stumbled forward, shouting, pointing, but her words were drowned under the rising hum vibrating through my yard. Behind her, the 3 men from the SUV rushed into view. They weren't calm anymore. They hurried through the doorway carrying equipment, metal cases, tablets, monitoring devices, frantically checking readings. They hadn't expected this. Whatever they had intended to trigger through the device, it wasn't the violent reaction unfolding before them. The consultant, Karen's man, stumbled out last, his expression cracked for the first time. Not confident, not controlled. He shouted orders I couldn't hear, gesturing wildly at the men as they struggled to stabilize something inside. Another flash detonated from deeper within Karen's house, this time accompanied by a muffled boom. A puff of smoke drifted out from her kitchen window. A transformer tripped somewhere down the street, a loud snap, followed by a cascade of failing connections echoing like dominoes falling in rapid succession. The grid buckled under the forced output, trying to find balance but failing under the strain. Karen screamed for someone to turn it off, anyone, somehow, to stop the surge. One of the men sprinted toward the side of her house, fumbling with a breaker panel. Sparks erupted as he pulled the main switch, but instead of shutting down, the panel spat a fountain of blue-white energy that knocked him backward onto the grass. It confirmed my fear. My solar system wasn't feeding the HOA grid. The device was using my output to override her house directly, forcing power into her circuits, overwhelming her internal wiring, flooding every outlet with saturating voltage far beyond capacity. It wasn't natural. It wasn't accidental. This was engineered. The consultant looked across the street toward me, eyes burning with accusation, but beneath the surface there was fear. He had lost control of whatever plan he had initiated. Karen stumbled back from her porch, coughing as smoke seeped from her front door. I ran to my inverter, trying to initiate a hard shutdown, but the system didn't respond. The device had overridden local control. My commands were blocked. Every safety lockout I'd installed was bypassed. It was no longer my system. My property had been hijacked, weaponized. I knelt beside the inverter, analyzing the energy pattern. The forced surge had a rhythm, a pulse, a mathematical coherence. It wasn't chaotic output. It was targeted. Something in Karen's house was drawing the power as if calling for it. What on earth had they installed? The question had no time for an answer. A deep, resonant crack echoed across the street. The ground trembled beneath my feet as the Tesla in Karen's driveway suddenly flickered, its lights stuttering wildly. The vehicle spasmed, its internal systems corrupted by unstable current. Then, with a violent burst, its charging port blew open, scattering sparks across the concrete. The car's security system screamed, honking, flashing, failing in erratic patterns. The consultant darted toward it, shouting at Karen to get inside the house, yet the irony was suffocating. Inside was where the danger was coming from. As the men scrambled frantically, my monitoring panel flickered inside my house. A single line of text appeared, something the hijacking device had transmitted directly into my system's diagnostic screen. Data capture complete. My breath froze. They weren't trying to destroy my system. The surge was just a consequence of their real goal, extracting everything. Battery profiles, efficiency curves, voltage tolerances, every shred of knowledge embedded in my solar technology. The device pulsed again, the red light glowing brighter before turning solid. Then, abruptly, the forced surge stopped. My inverter fell silent. The flood of power ceased. The entire neighborhood dimmed into a soft hum of normalcy. For a moment, everything was still. But Karen's house was not. A thick curl of smoke drifted from her kitchen window. The air smelled of melted plastic and scorched wiring. The consultant and his men stumbled out the front door, coughing violently. Their equipment sparked uselessly, overloaded beyond repair. Karen collapsed onto the lawn, gasping, shaking, overwhelmed by fear and adrenaline. The red device on my inverter blinked its final pulse, then burned out with a small pop. I removed it instantly, tossing it onto the concrete where it lay motionless. Across the street, Karen looked at me, not with anger, not with entitlement, but with the dawning horror of someone who finally understood the consequences of her choices. Her schemes, her theft, her alliance with a man who had manipulated her, none of it had ended with control or victory. It ended with her house half destroyed, her Tesla ruined, and her HOA authority shattered in front of the entire street. Emergency vehicles began flooding the block moments later, flashing lights reflecting off windows, sirens echoing across lawns. The consultant and his team vanished quickly, slipping into their SUV and speeding away before the authorities arrived. Karen remained on her knees, trembling. I turned away, stepping quietly back into my house. Justice, in its own electric way, had found her.